Hello everyone and welcome to Drawing with Line. My name is Jonathan Nagel, and to begin, just want to talk about sketchbooks. You can choose any kind of sketchbook you like. A 8.5 by 11 is what I have. It's from, you can pick them up at any store like Hobby Lobby or any local art store, or even online through Amazon or some other online retailer. I can put a link to some of this in the show notes, but here's, the basic idea of having a sketchbook just to explore during your art and creative journey. As you saw at the beginning of the video, I have a lot of different techniques that I want to explore with and show you. So everything from pens to pencils and markers and crayons. In my sketchbook, there's everything from storyboards to my own scribbles and doodles and drawings. So it's really a place where you can just express yourself and have fun. There's no pressure. There's no timeline. There's nothing. That's the point of the sketchbook, is just to have a good time and try things out, see what works, what doesn't work, and continue on your creative journey. So the first technique I wanted to just bring up is sort of a mechanical pencil. Here's a marker. There's also Sharpies. You can use other kinds of markers as well, and brush pens and colored pens. You can even use things like colored pencils. Now, not all these mediums are going to work together. Some of them don't work at all together, but the idea is just to give you a full range of techniques that you can use in your sketchbook, and use whatever you have at your disposal. If you just have pencils, that's fine. You can use pencils and pens, but open up your page in your sketchbook, or even if you don't have a sketchbook and you just have loose leaf paper or copy paper, that's fine too. So all I want you to do is just to have a sketchbook to explore. Okay, so for this first part of the video, this is just the warm up and getting loose. So I've sped this up to save you some time and allow you to just see what I'm doing using different mediums and different lines. Again, there's no perfection here. All I want you to do is just have fun and not judge the lines that you put down. Instead, get curious and observe the characteristics, the line variability, and how each medium feels. They all act and behave differently. So feel free to draw over lines, through lines, around lines. Doesn't really matter. Just be messy in your sketchbook and have fun. This is an opportunity to just warm up and see what comes up in terms of the lines that you draw, having fun. Later on in the video, I'll provide some exercises you can follow and practice along with, or at your own pace on your own. And then the last exercise, we will put all the practice together for a final abstract drawing using lines that you will learn in this video throughout. In this next clip, what I want to talk about is what ghosting lines are, and I'm going to start with the mechanical pencil to begin with. So it's important to keep in mind when doing ghosting lines that it's all about focus and concentration on pre-visualizing how you're going to draw the line. So instead of just kind of scribbling and what we did in terms of the warm-ups, what I want to do is concentrate on visualizing where the line is going to go by moving the whole arm. And when you're ready to put down the line, I want you to commit to making the line in one fluid movement. So you can see my hand ghosting through the different movements, and then when I was ready, I would place a line, and the pencil isn't showing up too well. So you'll see me going over a couple of those lines, maybe a little bit more to make it darker. But that's the essence of what a ghosting line is. You can make them short. You can make them parallel. You can make them scratchy. And it's also important to think about the different angles that you're placing the technique. If you want to make a direct line more up and down, you can place the pencil perpendicular to the surface, or you can lay it on its side and make a different mark as well. Now what I'm going to do is take the black brush pen and do the same thing, but to show a different type of mark that gets put down with the ghosting line. The brush tip is much more variable in how it's going to show up. I can't really control that like I can with a mechanical pencil or a pen. So sometimes the pen might be a fat line to a skinny line. It might be fat to thin to fat again. So thinking about these variations in line is a really great way to make a more engaging line, a much more lively line, and show a little bit more life in the work itself. Now what I'm going to do is change it and use a different medium entirely, a red crayon. So you have basically a waxy feel. It's going to kind of glide on really nicely. It's very different than a pencil and much different than a pen. It takes a little bit more of a aggressive movement to get the full the crayon to actually make a mark, whereas the pen simply just flows onto the page. It's a lot easier, and it's important with these different techniques to think about them for what they are. So let them do the work. So with the pen, let it flow, and with a crayon, got to maybe make a more direct mark. And so now we're going to move on to parallel lines, and I'm going to be using the Pilot pen. It's a Uniball fine line pen, and again, I can make links to all of these different techniques in the show notes. So if there's any questions about these, please feel free to ask in the comments if there's anything that you have a question about. So with the parallel lines, it's exactly what it sounds like. Make a long line or a short line, and each line after, make it parallel. So it's really about focusing and control and trying to get the next parallel line as close as you possibly can to the other one, so it kind of looks like it creates a full tonal range rather than separate marks like you see in the ghosted lines above. And you can practice long lines and short lines, medium lines, and this will prepare us for future exercises as well. Sometimes you'll notice that there's some mistakes that are made, and that's totally okay. But make them as parallel as you can. You'll notice a couple of the mistakes that I'm pointing out and some of the ones that look a little bit better. These parallel lines take time. You might find different movements in your wrist, your arm, how you sketch from left to right or up and down. It just really depends on what feels right to you making that clean mark. The last of these focused exercises here are going to be the aiming point-to-point lines. Now, these are going to be a little bit more tricky to do because what's involved is the ghosting idea and the parallel line, but connecting one point to another. And so it's like you're essentially skewering the two lines with a line that you put down. And this one takes a little bit of time to get used to, But you got to really so you got to really think through how you're going to approach connecting one point to another with one line. And sometimes you can play games with, shorter points or points that are in further distance apart. It really just comes down to is practice and continuing to try this out as much as you can. Again, practice makes perfect, or once I heard practice makes permanent. So think about that, is that the more you practice, the more this will sink in. This next section that I want to have a couple of exercises around is what I call doodles and squiggles. You might have heard those terms before. And basically, these are just very fun and expressive gestural lines that are done very quickly, and one could say maybe explosively. The idea is not to think or focus too much. It's more about just allowing whatever to come through in a very quick manner. So just express yourself and feel the line kind of come through. And this first set of marks I'm going to be making with the Faber-Castell marker. It creates a little bit of a thicker line than you're seeing with the others. And this might be akin to, say, like something that looks like a signature or a quick little nothing or a squiggle. And it's important to just get these kinds of lines because they are a part of the entire line universe as well. It's not just rigid, straight lines. There's also these fun and bold, expressive lines as well. So practice as many as you can. You can use as many pages as you want in your sketchbook or whatever materials you're using. And pay attention to if a line is starting to look like a shape. So you'll see some of these lines are beginning to seem a little bit more shape-oriented, and I want to try to steer away from that as much as possible in drawing lines, because we're not drawing shapes yet. Shapes are, composed of lines, and it's important to just get confident in drawing lines first. But you'll see that they're a little bit more grabbing of the eye when we have these kinds of lines, just because of the energy that's inside of them, rather than the sort of boring and dull way that straight lines and the parallel lines look in comparison. But you can also make those lines fun and engaging as well by using contrasting ideas like thick to thin, or even using, like I'm here, using a brush pen, using different mediums to create those lines. So the brush pen, it adds even more dynamic gestural qualities to a doodle or a squiggle because it's by nature already a very fluid and also rhythmical medium to use. That brush tip really adds a lot of variability in the mark. The next technique I want to use is just a blue colored pencil. And with this, again, there's going to be a different pressure sensitivity that I'm going to have to use. Within a pen and a marker, the ink just flows out. But with a pencil, it takes a little bit more grit and pressure to actually make the mark itself. But you'll see that there's still a lot of liveliness and expressiveness you can get out of even a colored pencil as well. Now I'm going to use a green colored crayon, doing the same thing. The crayons tend to be fun, and they also have a tendency to go from a light mark to a dark mark, depending on how much pressure you put into the crayon itself, or any medium that's similar to a crayon, like a China marker or something that is a waxy medium like that. The last technique I want to use here is a red crayon. Again, it's the same as the green crayon. There's not going to be a lot of difference except for the contrast in hue color from green to red. So that's going to be the major difference here. I wanted to accentuate some more of the angularity. And now I'm going to work on some rote drawing exercises with various types of line. We'll begin with straight lines, then arc lines, then wavy lines, and end with zigzag lines. The idea here is to just have focused repetition and just practice, practice, practice. So you'll see here with the straight lines, I draw one line and then I go over it 8 times. So with each one of these lines, it's a matter of practicing over and over again by doing 8 consecutive lines on top of the original one that you put down. And each one of these lines requires a small line, a medium line, and a long line. Basically, a quarter of the page, a half of the page, and a full width of the page. That's what I want you to try and practice with these exercises. Things to be aware of as you're doing this too is that there's going to be a lot more control on the smaller lines versus the long lines. So if they look a little bit hairy, or if there's variability and some, you'll see at the very end of some of these lines, it looks a little bit more like horsetail or some sort of, bristle. It's because to draw that same line over and over again just takes a lot of practice to get to a perfectly true line that you draw over and over again. It's possible. I used to be able to make very distinct, clear lines like that, but it just takes a lot of practice, and it's just a matter of doing this. What I'd suggest, each day, trying just to draw lines, or when you're bored, or when you need some more practice, just to do that. With the arc lines, it's the exact same process. Do small lines, medium lines, and long lines. A quarter of the page, a half of the page, and a full length of the page. And make sure that on the arc line, you don't make the arc too difficult. It's a very subtle arc, not something that is, very almost like a half circle. I wouldn't look at trying to do an arc like that. I would say try to do something that's a little bit more of a subtle arc on your page, because that will be, one, easier to do, and it'll still help you understand sort of the ability to arc a line rather than continue to make it straight. The third line that we're going to explore here is the wave line. Some call it an S line. You can do an S curve where it's just one sort of curve, or you can do 2 curves. You can do as many curves as you want. It's really up to you. It's just a matter of keeping the lines, again, short, medium, and long, following the same idea as in the straight lines and the arc lines. And each one of these, go over them 8 times so that you really start to get that repetition and regularity in the line work itself. Things to make the process a little bit more engaging and fun. You can also think about how can you make the wave lines closer together, thinking about what we did within the parallel lines. So you can try that. You can see how much of a wave you can create. So just trying different methods to see what feels the best and what works the best with your hand and the different mediums you're using. You might even try using a brush pen to see what happens. I might recommend, though, that might be something to evolve into. Start with these lines because they're repetitive lines. Just do them using a pretty solid pen like the one I'm using here, which is this Uniball fine line. It puts down a very stark black line, and it's a great technique to use. Now I've moved on to the Zig Zag line, and with the Zig Zag line, it's just that. It's a zigzag. You can do a short amount of zigzags or more zigzags. It just depends on what you want to do. And again, go over each one of these 8 different times to get the full amount of repetition and practice out of this. And I might recommend, after you go through this, if you're following along, or if you're going to do this at a later date and just watching right now, I might recommend doing pages and pages of these, because there's no better thing to keep practicing. It's like going to the gym. The more you practice, the better you're going to get. And also observing these kinds of lines in nature too. Like, you might say to yourself, this looks like mountaintops, or the wave lines might look like the undulation of hills or the ocean, or even of cars. Like, there's a lot of things in nature you're going to see that mimic these lines, and so that will help you later when you're drawing and recognizing these kinds of lines in nature as well. Straight lines kind of go, everywhere. You can look at picture frames, and you can look at beds, and you can look at hallways and doorways and houses. Everything seems to have a straight line that you look at, just because of the mechanical processes of a lot of manufacturing that creates these objects in reality. But most of nature is going to be, rounded lines and organic lines. But it's both important to dip into mechanical looking lines and also organic lines. So that's why I want to have this contrast of line making and practice being done. And don't mind that the lines get a little bit hairy. That's fine. Again, there's an infinite number of lines. The more focused and controlled you are, the more dull and boring your line work is going to be. But also think about, if you want something to be intentionally dull and boring, that's okay. Just know that you're doing it intentionally rather than doing it unconsciously. So if you need to free up some of the energy, making hairy lines is completely okay. Don't feel the need to be perfect on these. Plus, this is just practice. Nobody's going to see this, and just have fun with it and let go. See how many of these lines you can put down. Now that you've practiced drawing various lines, this next exercise is about putting everything you've learned into practice. I'd like you to find a clean sheet of paper or spread in your sketchbook, or feel free to use a sheet of drawing paper and draw 1,000 lines. Use in practice all of the lines we've explored today, including ghosted lines, parallel lines, point-to-point lines, doodles and squiggles, as well as straight lines, arc lines, wave lines, and zigzag lines. Most importantly, relax and have fun with this exercise. If you finish this exercise and want to share it, I'd love to see what you make. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for future episodes. And follow me on the various social media channels linked below in the show notes. Thank you for joining me today. I'm thrilled you did and can't wait to share more soon. Have a wonderful day.